Well, hello, everyone. You've been looking at that satellite, which was largely dry throughout the state of California, but a big change in our weather pattern coming. I'm ABC 10 Chief Meteorologist Monica Woods with a look at our long duration wet pattern heading our way. We're going to be breaking it all down because this is going to be quite a long change as well as a welcome change, a needed change at that. Maybe not welcome because of the timing, because it starts up on Friday evening, will take us all the way into our weekend forecast and beyond, with the impacts being rain and snow. Planning for changes in that forecast, including perhaps altering some weekend plans or some driving plans over this year, because you can it can get pretty gnarly, especially when we're expecting snow. We've got our whole weather playlist, by the way, on this ABC 10 streaming app. You can see the extended forecast, explainers, weather and climate specials, including our Emmy award-winning special called Water Wasted. You want to check it out there on ABC 10 Plus. Make sure you download it wherever you download apps for free. On Roku, Fire TV, Apple TV. It's live, local, always on, and many of our smart TVs now have that app available as well. Tracking the changes, we have been stuck under this ridge of high pressure, bringing dry weather throughout much of the state throughout the course of January. We're going to be talking about how that has played into some dangerous conditions for the state, what that means for the water year, and what's ahead as we start to see some pulses of moisture coming through. Now, we had this low come through over earlier this week and the weekend. That brought a decent amount of rain for Southern California, at least comparatively speaking to this dry year that they've had. Unfortunately, it did come at the expense of some mudslides as well due to the burn scars there. Our high pressure ridge is going to take a break from our active weather pattern. Rain and snow on the move. Our low pressure system kind of driving in that moisture from the Pacific, but don't take your eyes away from that high. Because of the position, there's still some uncertainty on where the rain will fall, if it will be rain or snow, and what the temperatures are going to look like. So let's take a look at those temperatures, and you can see the departure from normal. We see a pretty good batch of warm air trying to press its way northward. This is the same time frame that we're looking at that moisture moving inland, which could result in a higher snow level. Would be better certainly for travel, not better for the snowpack. This is a really important time to build that snowpack so that we can meter that snow melt off slowly to fill our reservoirs. If it comes in the form of rain, it just becomes runoff, and water managers have to store it because it's coming down the hill at a pretty good clip. You don't want flooding dangers down the hill into the valley where we see the lowest elevations, and that water would accumulate. So we need to be real careful on how that water is managed this time of year when we see these warm storms coming through. But again, it's all going to be dependent on where that high pressure ridge is. So let's take a look at the European model. It has a slightly tighter grid to it, meaning we get a little bit more precision with this model data. And for this particular one, on Friday morning for the commute, it looks like it will be riding just up to the north of that I-80 line, including the Tahoe Basin. This would be a fairly decent time as it stands right now on this Tuesday to head up the hill on Friday to kind of get a jump on any travel. If you're headed northbound on I-5, you're going to encounter not only rain along I-5, but once you get up towards Shasta, that will be snow. Again, the way that things stand right now, we're still in that colder pocket of air on the leading edge of this weather system coming in as it interacts with a colder pulse of a weather system to the north of us. So we're kind of in that perfect zone, if you will. Mountain snow, valley rain. But this is going to be shifting as we move our way through our Friday. Now, we'll still see the opportunity of some Sierra snow, mostly along I-80, which happens to be where most of those trucks are coming through. There'll likely be some holds, some travel delays on Friday evening as we head into the end of our work week here. So coming in on I-80 or outbound on I-80 over the passes, at least for Donner Pass, may be a little bit tenuous just because of where the position of that cold air is. But right behind it, we have some warmth that's going to be building in, and that's going to dramatically change things. The evening commute, a little bit sloppy north of I-80, along I-5, along the northwest coast here in the North Bay area. And then as we move our way through the evening into early Saturday morning, what you'll notice is these contours start to change. So we're not so much seeing a widespread snow event in the Sierra. We'll start to see a mix along I-80. Highway 50 Still seeing some snow Saturday morning, but we're starting to see that warmer air come into play with this weather system. This is also going to increase the moisture. Warmer air can hold more moisture, meaning when we get an active weather pattern, the warmer air, it tends to result in higher precipitation totals, with most of that falling well north of San Francisco, but near Fort Bragg up towards Eureka, which was harder hit. If you remember those November storms, those were big atmospheric rivers that came through. One in particular was a pretty good atmospheric river, and it was a long duration event, which resulted in some big rain totals, got us off to the water year with an incredible start. And then January hit, and that's why we're talking about how nice it is to see this precipitation coming in as we're wrapping up January, heading into February. Okay, fast forward into Saturday afternoon. Look at how this has changed here. We start to see the precipitation dropping a little bit more into the northern San Joaquin Valley, more towards the Bay Area. And then through that 80-50 corridor, no longer do we see the white and kind of the light purplish color indicating the snow. Now we're looking at rain. And most of that snow is confined to the very highest elevations in the Central Sierra. So Mammoth will get some pretty decent snow. Kirkwood getting some decent snow, but everything north of that is going to be kind of a sloppy mix until you get to the very highest elevations and some of the higher slopes there if you're a skier or a snowboarder. On Saturday evening, we see almost an entire rain event for the Sierra. Now, I will add a little bit of a pause here to just say, at least we're not getting a huge snow event on the early side of this, followed by a warmer event. That can be catastrophic and has proved catastrophic in the 80s and 90s when we had huge flood events due to kind of that cycle of cold, huge snowpack, and then this warm atmospheric river comes in. So we're getting the rain on the front end of this. And it does appear on the back end we will get some snow. So kind of playing out like we saw in November as well. But again, even along northbound on I-5 where we had snow on that Friday, now we're seeing rain. But that line just really wants to hug that I-80 line northward for the biggest totals here. So I'll put this out as a preliminary. This is going to change. Bottom line, this is going to change. We're looking all the way out to Sunday. Here we are on Tuesday. Once we get into that Thursday, Friday timeframe, we'll have a much better indication of how much snow we're going to get. But right now, this is just going to broad brush it at about 1 to, say, 8 inches of snow. Some of the higher elevations at about 10 inches of snow in that Tahoe Basin. We look at the rainfall totals, and these are going to be more impressive just based on the nature of what the weather models are indicating. We're going to see a warmer storm come in, holding more moisture, giving us higher precipitation values. And that will come in closer to about 1/4 of an inch to almost about 1/2 an inch of rain once we get to Sacramento. As I mentioned, the rain line kind of running right north of I-80. So we get to Yuba City, and it's a much bigger number at 1.5 inches. Colusa over 1 inch of rain. Oroville, almost 3 inches of rain. Nevada City, same scenario, about 2.7 inches of rain. This is going to be a multi-day total, not just one day alone. Again, preliminary, just kind of putting it out there. This is what we're tracking behind the scenes. Wanted to at least show you where we're starting, and then by Thursday, Friday, we'll see where we end up, right? Okay, here's a look at our January rundown of precipitation, and it has been slim pickings. We have to go all the way back to January 3rd, right after the new year. Only 0.3 inches of rain. So that's all we put in the rain bucket for the month of January, despite the fact we saw a few light showers come through over the weekend. Didn't total anything. So officially, this is where we stand right now. Our average should be closing in on almost 4 inches of rain for the month. And you can see the precipitation tracker. We were looking pretty good. So the deficits for this month are a little bit more off than, say, the deficits from the water year, which begins October 1st of last year, will run all the way through September 30th of this year. But really, our window of opportunity ends by April. If we don't start to pick things up by April, we just don't get anything barely in May through much of September into the beginning of October. So this is how things are shaping up right now. It's a pretty good mark to kind of take account where we've been and potentially where we're going to be headed for the remainder of our active water year. This season, we've had 81 inches of rain for downtown Sacramento. We already talked about that monthly total. So our average to date is 9.59 inches. So we're about 3 inches behind for the month, and we're about 1.75 inches behind for the season. January is our biggest water month. So on average, that is. So this could be a sign of some problems down the road. The water year started off really good. So at least we have that in the rearview mirror, right? November and December, at least were really good months. In fact, November, well above average. Usually we get about 2.5 inches of rain, and we got almost 4 inches of rain. So we just kind of flipped. Let's just say we flipped January and November. That's maybe a better way to look at it, because December was still decent. And then January just came in really slim here with a ridge of high pressure that was blocking it. This was the pattern that has been largely set up over the month of January, preventing anything from coming through. That high pressure ridge was set up, and so all the storm systems, and there were plenty that were out in the Pacific, they just headed up and over that high pressure ridge. And that also was part of the reason that the eastern half of the country was blocked in with that really cold Arctic air. As we were sitting under this ridge of high pressure, we actually saw above average temperatures. San Jose, by the way, is off to the warmest start of a water year on record. So we've seen some really warm conditions here. I know the mornings haven't seemed so warm, but the afternoons have warmed us up for average temperatures. Speaking of average, let's take a look at our monthly rainfall. And as I mentioned, November, we see barely 2 inches of rain. We had almost 4 inches, whereas January, we usually see about 4 inches of rain, and we've only had 0.3. So all in all, we're kind of evening the score here, since November was so wet, whereas January was fairly dry. But you'll also notice February can be a really wet month on average, as is March. Sometimes we call it our miracle March, when we end up with a dry start to the water year, and March tends to get a little wetter. We call that a miracle March. We say, hey, we're picking up some steam here. And then we start to see things dwindle, certainly towards the end of our spring season. By May and June, things pretty much are done for bringing us precipitation in California. That was the downtown Sacramento averages, by the way. Statewide, here's a look at our rundown. And this is as of today. So we're looking at some pretty decent numbers when you just look at sheer numbers. And I will say Los Angeles with 0.97 inches, that's better than what we had been seeing at 0.03 before that low pressure system came in. So that's what got us off to this very dry start to the water year, the driest for many areas since record keeping began. Our departure from normal, unfortunately, these numbers continue to grow. Most of the state now below average. Redding and Eureka remain the outliers. They are still above average. And I'll tell you what, we're going to pick up big time in the northwest coast of California, just based on what the models are saying for this run of atmospheric rivers coming through. For downtown Sacramento, we're off to our 8th driest start to January here, with the top 5 driest. With the rundown, 2015 for the month of January, we had 0.01 inches of rain. And many of us remember just a couple years ago here, 3 years ago, we only had 5/100ths of an inch of rain. Most of the numbers here, as you'll notice in the top 5, are since 2010 that we've had dry Januaries. Something to keep in mind, just the 2 outliers there, 2007 and 1889. We do tend to get a dry stretch in the winter months. We just don't like to see them prolonged. The longest that we had was actually in that year of 2022, when we had our second driest January. Started January 8th, lasted through March 14th, where we had no measurable precipitation, and that was 66 days. The all-time longest stretch, and this is outside of the winter months, just all-time longest stretch. And keep in mind, we normally don't see any precipitation from June, say, to about the end of October. 194 days, that was in 1880, from May 13th to November 22nd. So we have seen some very significant dry stretches. Unfortunately, that can lead to prolonged drought periods as well. Okay, so I did want to just reflect on the past couple of years. I know we're talking a lot of dryness right now, and that can elevate concerns on access to water once we go into those drier months. Well, recent water years have been pretty good. We dug out a drought in 1 year alone in 2022-23, that water year. We were well above average. Last year, I know it shows below average, but you'll notice downtown Sacramento, our average is 19.20 inches of rain. We were at 18. So all things considered, given that the previous year was so well above average, we did pretty well. And there was a lot of storage going on as well. And things have really changed in terms of our water storage in California. We're now looking much more into groundwater storage. We obviously have our existing infrastructure for the above ground storage, and there's a lot of different shifting that's going on. So groundwater is a big key player now, more so than it had been, say, in the early 2000s when there wasn't the management system that was set into place once we went through our most significant and recent drought, which was not only dry, but it was abnormally hot as well, leading to a lot of evaporation. So if we've got above ground storage, that doesn't always help because of the evaporation rate when you're dealing with a climate that is warming. So that's something to consider as well. Our reservoir supply levels right now, again, that's why I wanted to show you those two previous wetter years, are looking pretty good. For all intents and purposes, we're above average. Our storage still at about 70 to almost 80% full. Shasta being our biggest reservoir in the state, we have 77% capacity. So that reservoir is looking really good right now. New Melones, Don Pedro, also big reservoirs in the Central Sierra. At least the storage for that snowpack and melt is about 70 to almost 80% full. Millerton on the lower side. The Southern Sierra hasn't really benefited as much from the recent snowfall that we've had this water year. So this is the rundown of that snow water equivalent. If you were to take that snowpack, melt it down, how much water would we be able to get from that? Well, this is what it looks like as of today. We're only at about 47% of average for the Southern Sierra, much different for the Northern Sierra, 95%. And keep in mind, again, our biggest reservoirs are in the northern part of the state, and we have the infrastructure to send that water southward. So at least there is hope there that we'll have some water, and it looks decent enough for this coming year, 68% of average statewide. Now, that April 1st number, we always like to point that out because that's the point where we start to see our peak snow melt as opposed to our peak snowfall. So snowpack started off robust. This year was great. We had our statewide average running well above average, and it looks like an EKG where we just flatline right here, right through the month of January currently. Last year started off super slow, and then it picked up steam at the end of our rainy and snow season. So again, it's still pretty early in the game. Friday through Saturday forecast, this is just a preliminary number. We're looking at anywhere from about 1 to 10 inches of snow on average, but some of the bigger places, Kirkwood, potentially 10 to 18 inches, Palisades, Tahoe, 7 to 14. I will just say it is going to come with a mix of rainfall as well, and that is what leads us to potentially some precipitation risk because we will see kind of that rain mixed with snow at the higher elevations. But there is a heavy snow risk as well coming out of the Climate Prediction Center saying that there's that slight risk of seeing an elevated high snowfall amount and then high wind risk also on the lower scale of things. That looks like it's going to be more likely possibly on Sunday if you're trying to time out, don't like the wind, feel a little bit vulnerable to that. Perhaps you got some trees that are not looking too good. That would be the day, would be Sunday. But a little too early to put out that wind forecast. So I did want to hold off on that. The 8 to 14 day climate outlook overall, we have a big shift in our pattern, not only coming this weekend, but it looks like through the beginning of February with a likely cooler scenario setting up throughout the state in the Pacific Northwest and a likely wetter as well. That likely drier setup in far southern California, more so towards San Diego and then the desert Southwest, whereas Northern California through about Oregon, looking at that likely wetter setup. And most of that gets going this weekend with that first plume of moisture coming in from the Pacific. As you can see, it's just this big fetch coming in. This is just our first one. And you can see there's another one right behind us right there. So we're going to get one through here, get a little bit of a break, and then another one is to follow, which will be good news for some of the smaller tributaries, say creeks, streams, even storm drains. You know, give them time to kind of flush through that water and then prepare for the next round of wet weather. So this is our Friday outlook. You can see the snow that I was talking about right here. One caveat, Southern California not going to benefit from this. So we're unfortunately going to head back into a pretty dry period for Southern California. By Saturday, we're right back with that next plume of moisture. This is going to be kind of some warmer precipitation coming through at least central California. It's still pretty cold here throughout the Pacific Northwest and Oregon. But woo, look at that. We have this big fire hose of water coming through. I mean, that's impressive. But what you'll also notice is look at the origins. It's down towards the Hawaiian Islands. This is what we sometimes call a Pineapple Express kind of atmospheric river, where it's pulling in some of that warmth along with the moisture coming in, some snow confined to more of the Trinity and Shasta area, the extreme northern Sierra there. And then we'll start to dig in. We just see successive storms coming in until we get to Friday, February 7th. And then we kind of put a pause on things. Not to say that we won't get more on the tail end of that. It's just that at that point, we're starting to kind of take a breath here, recalibrate, see where the atmospheric rivers are going to be heading, and the atmosphere kind of starting to calm a little bit. But the future moisture looks good. And again, I point out the origins of that plume of moisture. You see the Hawaiian Islands right there at the bottom of our screen. So kind of nice to see that visual of where that's coming from and heading to. And we just keep bringing it in round after round. May get a little bit in Southern California towards the tail end of next week. A little too early to tell, but again, a lot to unpack here as we dig closer to kind of opening up the door for all of this to come through. And I think it's really good timing, not so much because it's on the weekend, but we get that second snow survey coming in on February 3rd. So that'll hit on Monday. Last time we had that statewide average is at 108%, but that was largely due to that robust start to the year in November and December. And then we dried out. So it was kind of looking a little bit on edge here in terms of what that snow survey would look like. Drought monitor, we'll get a new one on Thursday. This is what the current one will look like. Here's October 1st. This is where we started. This is where we are. And most notable in Southern California, growing severe and extreme drought. Now, it will be interesting to see how much of a difference just one storm system made in Southern California this past week in terms of our drought index. Our statewide water project, last time we had that snow survey, allocations increased to 15% due to the strong storms in early December and November, and also the increase in reservoir levels. But the Department of Water Resources monitoring soil moisture, which remains critically dry in much of the central and southern part of the coastal state, as well as a dry long-range outlook due to La Nina, which we'll take a look at. Here's a look at building a water year. And this really paints the picture. Fall rain starts October through November. 50% of our precipitation falls December, January, and February. So we're kind of closing the door on all that. Peak snowpack here, 1st of April. Peak snowmelt continues through May, and that is when we start water at its highest demand. So what has this year looked like? Well, we had that long duration atmospheric river in Northern California starting in November. Then in December, multiple weak ARs. That's what bumped us up so high above average. But then we dried out. That's when the Southern California wildfires hit. Southern California did not benefit from multiple weak ARs and the long duration atmospheric river. That was in Northern California, so they remained critically dry. Fire danger went up. Santa Ana winds happened. Here's a look at our water conveyance system. I did want to show this map. I show this periodically just to show how complex it is. It is truly, I'm still learning about it. Honestly, I've been here over 20 years, and I'm still learning every day a little bit more intricacy about not only how many reservoirs are in the state, but how they're operated, who they operate for, and who owns them. I mean, we could go on, but we don't have that much time here, right? Here's a look at our La Nina pattern. And this is what we've largely been seeing. Now, this is just a kind of what is the average for a La Nina pattern. We're still in kind of that weak period and expected to be there through the end of March. And then it's very likely we'll move into a neutral kind of not La Nina, not El Nino. We'll just be kind of be in that neutral phase. But it's possible we may head back into a different phase right on the heels of that. So a lot to still look at with that. But a wetter than average pattern typically happens in the Pacific Northwest through extreme Northern California, drier than average in Southern California. And it's pretty much been playing out like that, especially as this next round of atmospheric rivers starts to head our way. So that will be interesting to watch to see how those play out. Looking at just breaking down kind of the regional forecast and how much of a difference we're going to see by the time we get into Friday. If you are planning mountain travel, dry Wednesday and Thursday. Those highs will be in the 40s, morning lows in the teens. Bundle up if you're headed up to the high country. Plan to get in on some of that midweek skiing and snowboarding. There's still plenty of snow up there, by the way, and you could get a deal on some hotels and some ski lift tickets. Midweek is always a good time to go. Once we get into the weekend, it's going to be dicey. We're going to see lots of changes with snow level up and down the pass level. As far as the conditions at the lower elevations, it's going to be probably quite a bit sloppy, especially for the lower runs. And then by Sunday, we're going to incorporate some winds. Again, we'll be updating you on how that looks for the Sierra, but it does look like we're going to get some pretty decent winds in the Sierra on Sunday. Looking at the foothills, it's going to be a rain event. This is not going to be a low snow elevation event at all, despite the fact we've been seeing those cold morning lows in the 30s to near 40. We start to pull in some of that warmth here by Sunday. Highs are in the upper 50s. For the foothills. That's a warm rain. There's still some uncertainty if we'll even get rain on Sunday, but right now we'll just call for, hey, prepare for anything starting Friday through the weekend. Highs will stay in the 50s and low 60s here for the coast. We'll see some patchy fog on Thursday, and then the leading edge of that weather system starts to pull through on Friday, largely north of the Bay Area. But we'll still see a few sprinkles in the forecast there into our Saturday and even into our Sunday as well. Looking at our 3-day forecast, if you need to get some stuff done, some grocery shopping, things you just don't want to be dodging raindrops for them. Maybe Wednesday and Thursday, if you can get a chance to do that. We will see some pockets of opportunity of dry weather. It's just going to be kind of that ongoing risk of seeing a heavy downpour and then it will clear up, heavy downpour, clear up, starting on Friday, where we see some of the coldest air actually starting us off there on Friday. And that's why that snow line is going to be quite a bit lower on Friday. Once we get into the weekend forecast, look how dramatically these temperatures start to change. Some areas will be in the mid to even upper 60s on Sunday. We will start to see some cooler air arrive Monday into Tuesday, and that is very favorable for perhaps bringing back down that snow line, putting some snow on the Sierra instead of having the rain to kind of wash down that lower elevation snow. It would be nice to see some snow replenished up there before we get too deep into our winter season, before we start to shut things down for all intents and purposes with precipitation. Wrapping up the complete 10-day forecast, what you're going to notice is we continue with that risk of showers all the way into next Thursday. So it looks like the rain bucket is going to start to fill up here, and another colder storm starts to move in Wednesday into next Thursday, which would again bring down that snow line. Bigger problems with travel through the Sierra, but also very beneficial for bringing up the snowpack, eventually snow melt into our reservoirs, feeding the state with the water that we'll need through the dry months. All right, that was a lot, I know. But again, this is a big pattern shift for us. We are going to be keeping you posted on ABC 10 Plus. That's our streaming app, as well as these extended forecasts wherever you stream, and also on ABC10.com and on air. So I hope you have a good rest of the day and stay dry out there as we start off our Friday into the weekend.